Welcome everyone, this is Straight Talk, Nina Bode from Future Females Zurich. And we are having a discussion tonight with Stella Ekogbulu from Leadright Consulting GmbH, who is a managing consultant in this space of leadership. The conversation we're having, the future of management, and what does it mean? How do we build a people-centric organization? And so it's beneficial for everybody. But I think I'm not going to sort of answer that question. I think, Stella, that is you. But could you please introduce yourself to everyone and just tell us a little bit more about who you are, where you're from, and where you're at the moment, and just a little bit of a history on your career.
Thank you so much, Nina. Hello, future female family, and friends that are joining. So like Nina said, my name is Stella Ekogbulu. I'm originally, well, I'm not originally, I'm actually from Nigeria, right? But I've lived in Switzerland. Next month is going to make me 16 years in this lovely country of Switzerland, yeah. Wow. Living in Zurich, yeah.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. So I spent 25 years working in the corporate world, in audit, in banking, and then in the finance sector of multinationals. And my last role was the head of cash management. And this allowed me to work with people in over 60 countries of the world, all across the globe, right? And I got to work with leaders. So I tell people that I've met leaders, good, the bad, and the ugly, you know? And so in 2019, I thought to myself, it's about time I go after work, because I felt this kind of, this sense of dissatisfaction after a while. So I said to myself, why don't you go and do something that would challenge you, give you more fun? Because I love talking, right? I love training, I love adding value to people. So I went off to start my own business, started as a sole proprietorship, and then evolved into a limited, liability company in Switzerland. And what I do is I help organizations develop leaders who lead right. Because in the course of my corporate world, I found that there was a gap in leadership from what I saw. So I thought I should come into this space and kind of work to improve this. So I work with organizations globally from my home in Switzerland. And I also work with individuals who want to become better. Well, not even better. They want to become the best version of themselves. Because I also found here that people are not aware of how much potential they have in them. They're limited by their current situation and circumstances. So I've been working with individuals through individual coaching and group coaching and training, just to help people unearth that gold that lies within them. So that's, in a summary, what I do.
Wow, that's very fascinating, and I think you're so spot on with that topic of leadership. I think the role, within the space of leadership management has changed so much that we really need to understand where you're at as an individual and how do you manage the teams, how do you work in the organization. And it's kind of exactly why this topic fits in so perfect with you, because it's about the people, where and how. And just a question to some of the audience out there, are you entrepreneurs? Are you working in organizations? If so, have you heard of are you familiar with the terminology people-centric organization? This kind of the new way of being in companies. Do you believe in it? Are you working in an organization like that? And do you think it's the way forward? If you want to comment, please do so. It would be great, because essentially it would be just nice to understand where you're at and if you understand this topic and how important it is to you. But just getting onto that topic, Stella, what is people-centric? What is a people-centric organization? It's of course we know it's straightforward, but what does it really mean? What do businesses need to adapt the mindset in terms of creating this kind of culture?
Very great question, very great topic, Nina. So for me, a people-centric organization is an organization that places a high importance on its people. They understand that people are not human resources, but they are human assets. And they are the greatest assets an organization can have. And they also understand that in order for them to be successful, they've got to ensure that the people are motivated and are inspired to function at their best. And so these kind of organizations, they lay emphasis on things like diversity, And you know, a lot of times when we hear about diversity, we're looking at racial diversity, we're looking at gender, we're looking at sexual orientation, but there is a lot more to that, because each person is uniquely different. And so we may all be female, we may all have the same gender, the same race, the same sexual orientation, but we are still different. We're different personalities. And so if an organization wants to be people-centric, they've got to understand that people are uniquely different. They have different ways of being motivated. They have different ways of being communicated to. They have different strengths. You know, they have different values that they bring to the table. So then if an organization is treating everyone the same, then they're going to miss it. So people-centric organizations focus on this. They kind of understand that people are different and they treat them differently. They also look at inclusivity, right? Where they make sure that there's place on the table for every single person, irrespective of your gender or whatever it is, right? They create an environment where everyone is free, everyone feels welcome, everyone feels accommodated. And, you know, they also allow for open communication. They don't just pay lip service and say, oh, okay, if you have a problem, report to management. No, they don't do that. They actually implement, they go beyond policy making to policy implementation, where people are free to speak openly, to speak frankly, to air their views, to come up with ideas and innovation. You know, these are all the things that they allow. And then another thing they allow as well is they allow for growth. Because since the focus is on people, people need to grow in order to become the best version of themselves. So they invest in the growth of the people side by side with the growth of the organization. So their focus is really on the people. So that for me is a typical example of a people-centric organization.
Okay, so exactly. So it really does put people on top of the game and put them in the #1 of priority. And I think, I mean, I quite like what you mentioned, you know, freedom of speech, a little bit more on let's all be vocal about what the needs and our pain points are. And I mean that's kind of funny because it kind of works back into letting go of the traditions and the mindset. And but how would organizations then implement this? I mean, you know, how would they sort of further develop this, that they think, well, you know, our mindsets have to change. We need to create this. How do you believe this should be done? You know, what kind of you know, what would the strategy be, for example? Does it start with the leadership? Does it start with management? Do they bring the people together? I mean, your point of view on this?
Yeah, so any change to be meaningful in an organization, it's got to start from the top. Yeah. You know, and that's why when I work with organizations, I work with the most senior leadership, because when they embrace change, then change happens. So they need to first of all understand that the workforce is now complicated, so to say. So they have the millennials, they have the Gen Zs, and each of these groups of people have a different requirement. So for example, the millennials and the Gen Zs, they're not looking for a boss, they're looking for a coach, they're looking for a mentor, right? So if an organization is going to focus on people, then the leaders need to understand that the way the people think now is not the way we thought at our age, you know? So that's so important. They need to understand that we are in a different generation, right? I mean, for example, when I was taking my examinations in school, we didn't have the access to Google, right? But the other day, my daughter was taking an exam and they had to turn on the internet in the school. Can you imagine? So if you're dealing with such people, you can't just talk to them, because then they can just quickly check to see whether what you're saying is right or wrong. So leaders, organizations need to start by helping their leaders embrace a change mindset, a paradigm shift from the way it used to be to the way it is now. And then they need to move away from expecting the people to come to them going to the people, right? They need to make the first move as leaders, right? You know, typically a leader would say, if my subordinate has a problem, let them come to me. No, it doesn't work like that anymore. You know, you've got to go to them and find out, you know, what are they going through. Meet them at their level, then you can lift them up and take them to where you want to take them. Again, they need to be able to establish common grounds within the organization. I always tell people that you can find common ground with anybody, right? And when you start a conversation with somebody based on common ground, you already break the barrier, right? So, for example, maybe you're talking to a subordinate and you're both discussing your favorite restaurants. And then guess what? You start talking about restaurants, talking about food. Suddenly the person is comfortable with you, and then you can ask the person about work, right? And you can give the person an assignment, and the person will be more willing to talk to you, more willing to embrace you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about taking interest. It's about opening up and then really sort of really giving that individual that's working under you, so to speak,
Yeah.
and giving them the opportunity to feel that they can have a trust in someone. And talking about trust, this is something else, but it's exactly that. It's exactly that point that I want to discuss with you. It's peer-to-peer, peer-to-peer sort of learning and helping. How important is that leadership? Exactly. Also, another sort of angle, instead of coming to me as the leader, go to your peer, learn from your peers, and work together within. You know, let's go back to grassroots levels and really work within your environment where you do feel comfortable. I mean, how important is that, Stella?
Okay, so that starts with redefining leadership. A lot of people, including even the dictionary, defines leadership as a position. But I prefer to define leadership like my mentor, John Maxwell, does, and that's influence, right? So leadership is about influence. And the lowest form of leadership is a positional leadership. So the peer-to-peer leadership, it's where you exercise influence over your colleagues. And of course, when you look at yourself not as superior to somebody, but as a peer, it's easier for you to find common grounds with the person. It's easier for you to communicate with the person. It's easier for you to share ideas, you know, and then it's also important to place value on people. The question is, what value do you place on people? When you value people, you respect people. And of course, when we also understand that, look, we cannot succeed without the help of people. There's actually an interesting statistic from the Stanford Research. It says that 87.5% of people knowledge is required to succeed, as against 15.5% of product knowledge, right? Or is it 75% now? Or is it 17%? But you know, but it's actually 87.5% people's knowledge. So if people come to understand that I am not an island, I need my peers to succeed, 100%. Then it's easy. Yeah. And you don't feel threatened by your colleague. You feel that together we can grow. That's why a growth environment is important. We can grow together. We can both become better. We can be growth bodies, helping each other to become better. Then it's easier for you to go to your peer to, you know, to ask for information, to ask for help, you know. Yeah.
No, 100%. I think it's so important, because that also creates a factor of you feeling well within the organization. You're feeling that leadership is being, you know, there's an agile approach of how people can go about getting things done. Because at the end of the day, well-being, flexibility, and understanding your employee is obviously very, very, very important. And actually, I want to touch back on that human aspect that you mentioned, human asset aspect that you mentioned earlier on. And what about, you know, when we look at people analytics, when you getting talent into your organization, for example, and using AI to actually filter through getting that individual where you nurture them in terms of the corporate culture, etc. Do you think that's a good way of implementing getting new talent into the organization, so that this forward thinking of how we manage the correct people within our environment, do you think that actually even works? Or, I mean, what do you believe?
To be honest, Nina, I'm not a fan of AIs in the hiring process. And I do get, I mean, I can imagine the dilemma of an HR manager getting tons and tons of CVs, right? How do they start? So you could start with use the AI just to maybe filter. But the problem is that, you know, when we filter, we're using data, right? Mm-hmm. We're not considering the individuals. We're not considering their behavior. And we're noticing that gradually organizations are shifting towards using behavioral analysis in the recruitment process. Because when you use the behavioral analysis, you get to know what are people's strengths, right? You get to know what are their strengths individually and what are their strengths in leadership. You get to know what are their values, and then you see, do their values even match and fit with the values of the organization? Because if you recruit wrong, right, it's difficult to nurture someone. But if you're using the behavioral analysis, asking them to do personality assessment tests, you know, a lot of things show up in the process. So you know what motivates them, how do they want to be communicated with, and then in that way, you're sure that you're putting the right peg, so to say, in the right hole, right? But if you're using just the data analysis, what you're doing is you're looking at CV, you're looking at, I mean, words that fit in with what you've put in the system, right? So you're looking more at people as what do I use now? As data, as against human beings, right? And you're not placing enough value on people. So a people-centric organization needs to look at people for who they are, you know. And in that process, when you use behavioral analysis, you then get, so to say, a right fit for your organization. And when you get the right fit, it's easier to nurture them. It's easier to get them to embrace the organization's culture because you already know what they're bringing to the table. You know, I helped an organization by conducting, because I'm also a behavioral analysis. I didn't mention that. I'm a behavioral analysis consultant. I didn't mention that. That's why I'm so passionate about this. So there was this organization where they realized that there were some areas that they were not really functioning as they would love to. So the CEO invited me to come in and do behavioral analysis for the most senior leadership. And we found that there was one particular personality style that was missing from the entire team of about 20. And that was the people-oriented personality. So everyone was compliant, right? Not everyone, but a good portion of the people were compliant. So the CEO said to me, they never make mistakes. We always, you know, get things right. But then that human factor, it was missing. And so because they did this analysis with me, they now made up their minds that when they're recruiting the next person, they've got to get somebody with this style, you see. So that's the power in using behavioral analysis. You're able to create a balance within a team by having different personality styles because they all bring something unique to the table. And this, I think, is lacking when you're using the people analytics, right?
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with you, because I think because when I was reading and sort of researching into this topic, and I saw AI, but I mean, of course, the recruiting process is a lot based around that. When you scan your CV, it's kind of picking up all the points that is out there in terms of what they are recruiting. But in an organization itself, I mean, how those people put together, like you say, in a behavioral. When you understand the behavioral analysis from unique individuals, that is what makes it a little bit more interesting in terms of where the organization can then focus and see where are the strengths and weaknesses of these individuals. How do they work within teams? How does leadership in fact, I think that word leadership should really not exist anymore. It needs to be sort of striped, and I don't know what they need to actually invent to recreate it. But Stella, I just want to before we get on to the end of some of the questions I wanted to ask you, there was a question that was posed to you, and the question was from Sesaluma, It asked, have you come across companies in the ZH area that apply a strong people-centric approach?
Well, I'm not going to be able to answer that question fully, because I haven't worked so much with organizations within the Zurich area. I've worked a lot with organizations globally, but not within the Zurich area. But I'm sure there will be organizations that apply that, right? I'm sure.
That sort of mindset.
Yeah.
And how would you say globally, if you think of globally versus here, what have you noticed globally that has really stood out for you, that you believe organizations can apply here in Switzerland?
Okay, so thank you. That's a great question. So what I've noticed globally is that organizations are actually shifting away from the systems, centric leadership. They're now focusing more on people. And so they're asking, people like me to train on soft skills. Typically, they was trained on things like time management and that, but they're now focused on personal development. They're hiring me to train their employees on personal development, right? Because they believe that the people need to, they need to become better in order to help the organization become better. And I'm also seeing that the leaders in organizations are embracing these changes. Right? They're now feeling excited. Oh, because I was working with an organization last week and I was saying to them, you've got to get mentors. And they were like, really? I've always heard about mentors. I mean, this were the leaders talking. I've always heard about mentors, but I never took it seriously. And I'm like, you need to take responsibility for your growth. You need to have mentors. So they're now embracing it. And what's also happening is that because the leaders are embracing this, we and consultants like myself are saying to them, look, it's not just okay for you as a leader. You've got to let it cascade through the organization. Absolutely. And so we're also focusing on teaching them how to empower their subordinates. And very importantly, to understand that people are very, very important. And really, it's like a mind shift. I mean, in one organization, the head of training said to me, I need you to train my people on transformational leadership. And I was like, oh, that is good. So globally, they're welcoming it, they're embracing it because they're seeing that that's the way forward. And they're also understanding that, look, the workforce is made of different age groups. And if we want to have a workforce that will be a going concern, so to say, we've got to create an environment where the millennials and the Gen Zs can thrive. Otherwise, who's going to work when we need to get our pension? Who's going to work for us to get our pension, right?
No,
so globally, globally it's being embraced. Yeah.
I mean, it was quite funny because actually a colleague who was just on this chat shared a story of exactly talking about the Gen Z, where he was offered a job, got the training, and he was really interested in doing the training and everything, and received the training, and 1 week later he quit the job. So it was basically a sort of a 4 to 6 week run, but this is how they are ticking. And I think when we're looking at talent and maintaining and retaining talent, less absenteeism, all of these things, we have to really start thinking of the people, because at the end of the day, the people are the ones that are generating the income. And that's actually just going down to my last question to you: the pros and cons of for any organization having to go into this transformation and transition. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Stella? Before we'll go to the audience and maybe ask 1 or 2 more questions that you can answer, and then that will be the chat for this evening.
Okay, so for me, I mean, the pros will always outweigh the cons. You see, what I always say to organizations is treat your people the way you want them to treat your customers. So if you are a people-centric organization, you treat your employees well, you allow them to be motivated, to be inspired, they are going to transfer it to your customers, right?
Exactly.
I mean, let's look at it. I mean, we want to treat ourselves to a lovely meal. Wouldn't you prefer to go to a restaurant where you'll have real waiters waiting on you, and enjoying the experience, as against where a robot brings you food? you know. So if when organizations are people-centric, then they place a lot of value on the people, and the people will transmit it to the customers for them, right? And then if you look at, some argue, there's a book I read where it was focused on systems, right? You need to have your systems in place and then people work. You know, we could have all sorts of systems in place, but who is going to press the button to get the systems working? It's got to be people. If the people are not motivated, I mean, they can sabotage an organization, right?
No, 100%. And I think you can hear, you when people are unhappy, and you've seen it, and I've seen it with people and colleagues that have quit a job and they disliked the leader and they disliked how the organization managed, and you know, their policies just didn't work. And it's sad because they build relationship with customers, and at the end of the day they leave and the customer's upset because they've built trust into someone, and then that trust is broken down.
Absolutely. And you know, again, when an employee feels that you value them, they love coming to work, they are going to give 200% of themselves to the work, right? And that translates to income, profitability for the organization, right? Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's just really no way an organization can function in the new without paying emphasis on its people, you know. And I keep saying it, people are the greatest asset of any organization whatsoever.
Absolutely, 100%. It doesn't matter if you're the most amazing entrepreneur or the most amazing CEO. If you don't have the people, you don't have the power. And then the organization doesn't have the power. Now, before we end this conversation with Stella, this has been really interesting just hearing. I know it's a very quick deep dive into this, and you've got such amazing knowledge. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to ask Stella a question before we sign out? Is there anything particular in this conversation that you found interesting? Please pop it into the comments here, and we'll quickly ask it. Thank you for an insightful conversation. So yeah, is there anyone who would like to just sort of ask a last question or two? Okay, there's nothing coming through, but Stella, is there any last words from you, how people can get hold of you? Yes.
Well, I mean, I'm very passionate about helping people become the best version of themselves, you know. I also believe that we don't need to wait. Yes, we're talking about having people-centric organizations, but people have to take responsibility for their own growth. Responsibility for their careers, responsibility for whatever it is they want to become in life. They don't need to wait for the organization to do it for them.
Absolutely. It's also one other way of moving forward. And I think, Stella, just to sum it up, I think, and just correct me if I'm wrong in what I'm saying, is that organizations need to start taking control of how they, and I don't want to use the word manage, but how they actually get the people to be more inclusive, try to understand the personalities behind the actual position that's being held. And I think ways of doing this is maybe doing regular surveys, making sure there's loads of regular team builds, and really get to understand where the pain points are lying of the individuals working within the organization. And I think if you are an employee, also be vocal enough to say, I need help. Speak to your peers, bring the leadership together, and maybe also when it's a peer-to-peer communication, say, look, in order for us to succeed, we need to be upskilled. In order for us to succeed, we need to have the leadership skills, to be taught or guide us more so that we can be the better versions of ourselves. So we can create profitability for ourselves, for the organization, and for everyone in a sort of sustainable way.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think it also, I mean, if organizations really appreciate the fact that they need people, some organizations look at people like easily disposable. If this one isn't working, we hire, fire, hire, fire. No,
Yeah.
it's not going to work anymore. You
No.
need to spend time building the people, create an environment where they will love, they'll be happy. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
No,
I'm,
thank you
I'm,
so.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we're going to have more people-centric organizations. But like we said, it's got to start from the top, and there has to be a paradigm shift, right, from the top of
Absolutely.
the organization, and it
It
cascades
has to
through.
stop from, we know better, like
Yeah,
I'm the mother and you're the child. So
absolutely.
that sort of mindset has got to shift, and it's good to understand what do the people need from us in order to create the perfect environment. But thank you
Mhm.
so much for your time, Stella. Thank you so much for everyone who joined us tonight on Straight Talk. And we will see you soon. Our next offline event is taking place, and our first offline event will be on the 20th of September, where it's all about community building, and we will connect with Panda and Clara Kreitz, who is the head of Panda in Zurich. Take care, everyone. Have a good evening, and goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you for having me, Nina.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Stella. Tschüss.
Cheers.